It seems like marathon training only just started, but I know that the Delaware Marathon is going to be here before I know it. So I thought I would do a quick overview of the course, the elevation, some of those major details, as well as my training plan leading into the marathon. Cheers, y'all. How's it going? I am getting so excited for the Delaware Marathon. But before I dive into the video, got to give a quick shout out to the beer sponsor of today's training update, and that is Unrefined Sugar, a delicious barley wine from Lagunitas Brewing Company. But oddly enough, Lagunitas isn't the one who sent me this beer to review and taste. It actually came courtesy of Dolce, which is the unrefined sugar of the unrefined sugar barley wine. Dolce makes what's called panela. It's an unrefined sugar made from whole sugarcane. Basically, all it is ground up sugarcane. They take the sap from the sugarcane and dry it out, and that's what makes the sugar, as opposed to a white sugar, brown sugar, even sugar in the raw, which goes through an insane amount of processing and refinement, all the chemicals to bleach the sugar, etc. None of that happens with this. It is just delicious, pure sugar, and it makes for one delicious beer. So if you want to check out some of their products, I do have a discount code that is listed below, but I'll put it on the screen as well. 22 I Run on Beer gets you 22% off of their Amazon shop, so I hope you'll check them out. But that being said, let's dive into marathon strategy. I have been wanting to run the Delaware Marathon for quite some time. I am from Delaware, and the race runs through a lot of the neighborhoods that I grew up in. So of course, I want to be as prepared as I can be to just put out like an awesome performance on April 24th when this race comes. So that being said, let's jump into the course. I'm going to do a quick overview of the course as well as the elevation profile so you know kind of what the race looks like. And then I'll talk through a little bit about my training so far, how it's going, as well as things that I want to work on throughout training before the race. So that being said, let's go ahead and start with the course. I'm going to look down because I have my computer in front of me now to review some of the course details. I'll put it up on the screen for you as well. But as I mentioned, this course runs through a lot of the neighborhoods that I grew up in, which I am particularly excited about, especially the first half of the race. So right now, if you look at miles 1 through 13, that kind of first loop that is sort of one long out and back, we're starting in sort of the riverfront area of Wilmington, Delaware, run through downtown, then across into Brandywine Park, where I used to run my cross-country practices, through the Brandywine Zoo, which we used to go to all the time as kids, past the kind of mill run next to the creek where we used to swim semi-illegally as children, up towards the park, past the house that my parents still currently live in, the house that I grew up in, through Rockford Park, where we used to run some of our cross-country races, past our rival school, up and around before winding back down and back towards the start. So very, very excited for this portion of the course, just because it will quite literally be a trip down memory lane. But then as we get closer to the halfway point, we get towards the portion of the race that I'm a little bit more nervous about for a few reasons. First, it's the second half of a marathon. This is always where the wheels come off. This is where I'm expecting to hit the proverbial wall, although I'm going to prepare as much as I can to avoid hitting that wall if at all possible. But this is also just one long out and back, as you can see. I am excited because it starts out on kind of this nature preserve trail that was built after I went away for college and have always wanted to go and check it out. So although I'm not necessarily super excited for the out and back, I am excited for the scenery that we're going to get to run past because I have been meaning to check it out anyway, especially this piece right here that goes through the Russell Peterson Wildlife Refuge. That's where they have like all these kind of new fancy structures, the new fancy elevated walkway, so very, very excited to run through there. To touch on the other reason I'm slightly nervous, I'm gonna go ahead and superimpose the elevation profile for this race. And you can see, although there's not a ton of elevation towards the end of the race in the second half of the race, I am a little bit worried about those two minor hills. Really, it's just the same hill, but doing it twice, once on the way out and once on the way back. I am happy that it is before mile 21 is when I'll be kind of finished with the elevation. It'll all be downhill from there because I'm hoping that I'll still feel relatively good. Usually in the past, my legs have started to really feel it around like the 22, 23 mile mark, so fingers crossed. But obviously you can see one of the other things that I'm slightly nervous about, that substantial climb early in the race as well. So this is what I'm having a lot of conversations with my coach about currently, is making sure, I mean, again, 200 feet isn't a ton, but I am familiar with these hills. I know the routes that we're going to run, so I know that climb really from mile 3 till about mile 8 it's just kind of a gradual hill at most points, but then that 6 to 7 mile mark is going to be very, very steep coming up from the river area up towards the park, my parents' house, etc. That is a much steeper climb. And so just making sure that I am strategic in how I approach that hill. I really, really conserve energy, take advantage of the downhill running back down towards the river, but making sure that I save my legs for, again, those two seemingly very, very small hills around mile 18, mile 21 to make sure that my legs are prepared to handle that challenge. So I've already sort of touched on my strategy, but really I think my key to success in this race is going to be holding back early on, particularly during the first half of the race. Obviously you have the adrenaline of the race leading into that. Plus, I feel like I'm just going to be so excited to be running past so many familiar places, familiar faces, my family and friends coming out to cheer me on, etc. And I imagine the first half is where the majority of the spectators are going to be for this race. So obviously that's the point where it will be very easy to get incredibly excited and possible to get carried away during the run. So just want to make sure I keep myself in check, remember my strategy, remember my goal paces, and just hold back early on, conserve that energy, because going into that second half, that long out and back, a significant portion of that is going to be on kind of this nature trail that runs through a marsh. So there is zero opportunity for spectators or support on that portion of the course. But even that long out and back, once we get into kind of some of the neighborhoods and things like that, I am just expecting that the bulk of folks coming to spectate and to cheer for this race are going to be on that first half in the downtown area, in the riverfront area, etc. I'm imagining that the second half of that race will be somewhat sparse in terms of spectators. Luckily, there is fantastic support, race support provided. There's plenty of hydration, nutrition, etc. along the course. Relatively frequent stops, so I'm happy about that. But yeah, I feel like the strategy is really going to be to take it easy, especially during the first half, but then even as I come back and pass the finish line completing the first half of the race, not to get too excited, to remember that yes, I only have one half remaining, but it is the longer half of the race. And so to not let myself get too excited, continue to take it out nice and slow. And honestly, I'm really thinking not until I make the turnaround of that and back and even come back some. I think once I hit kind of that hill at mile 21, that's when I can start to turn it on a little bit. Again, I think I'm going to be pretty fatigued at this point, but that's really where I can use any energy stores that I have. I really want to try not to make the mistake that I've made in so many of the marathons that I've run, especially at New York City, and let myself get carried away too early. I mean, I think at New York City, I crossed the 16-mile mark and I was like, only 10 miles to go. I can crush this. Let's turn it on. And then 22 to 25, I thought I was going to die. And so just reminding myself that this is a marathon and I need to conserve energy as much as possible and really wait until the last 10K to turn on whatever's left. So that's my overall strategy for the race. I am hopeful and tentatively confident that I can get into at least the 3:30s. Again, I ran 3:44:45, I think, at New York City. So it's only taking an additional 5 minutes off, which I think is definitely possible, especially given how much I fell apart at the end of New York City. I'm hoping that won't be the case at this race and I will be able to maintain a stronger pace throughout. I'm also hoping that I'll be going into this race a lot more prepared than I was going into New York City, a lot more consistent training. So I'm hoping that I can get into the 3:30s and maybe even close to the 3:30 mark. I think a 15-minute PR is a little bit ambitious, maybe a lot of bit ambitious, but again, we're gonna see where the training goes. We'll start having more specific conversations about pace as we get closer to the race. I had mentioned it, the nutrition and hydration part as well, but that is gonna be a real focus in training. This was something that really, I don't want to say fell apart, but just encountered some obscure obstacles at New York City, which I wasn't used to. I feel like nutrition and hydration is something I've been pretty confident in most of my races. I know exactly when I need hydration, whether I need water or Gatorade, and I'm taking fuel at the proper intervals. But it just seemed like something was off at New York City. I don't know. I mean, it wasn't really all that hot. I didn't feel like I was sweating a ton, but by pretty much halfway through the race, even maybe a little bit before halfway through the race, I just felt like I was dying of thirst. Like every time I passed an aid station, I was craving water, so much though that like I think I overdrank fluids and then was starting to cramp up because my stomach was so full of water towards the like final miles of the race. But it was a very weird thing because I felt like I was consistently taking in fluids but just couldn't satiate that thirst. So definitely want to play around with fueling and hydration strategies during training to make sure that that is dialed in, especially to make sure that I have the energy needed in those final stretches of the marathon. And then the last piece that I will touch on is just the mental part of marathon running. I've run a marathon in Delaware before that was also pretty sparse in terms of spectators, so I'm familiar with needing kind of the mental strength to get through difficult portions of a course when you don't have the crowd support to get you there. Obviously, New York City is the opposite of that. You have so much crowd support cheering you on throughout. That helps kind of maintain that energy or maintain that adrenaline rush. I know that I need to really practice on kind of some mantras, some mental tricks, anything that I can to kind of distract myself so that when I do hit some of those lows or when I feel like I'm struggling, I have strategies to fall back on to distract myself, to motivate myself, or to kind of identify goals that will keep me moving forward at a strong effort and not succumb to some of those negative mental thoughts that might come along. So that's a maybe not so quick overview of the course, the elevation, things that I'm nervous about, but things that I am committed to work on to make sure I am as prepared as possible once this race comes along. As far as how training is going right now, I am still doing a lot of kind of longer, slower effort runs, working on building that aerobic based, working on that heart rate training. I'm averaging kind of low 20s as far as weekly mileage. I think we're going to start to see that tick up a little bit. I got in a very strong, almost 9-mile run today before work that felt phenomenal, working in some steady state running. So not quite speed work, but pushing just outside my comfort zone, and felt really good, strong in my pace, strong in my heart rate, felt like I was recovering very well after those intervals. So training has just been going very, very well. And I'm looking forward now that we've done several weeks of kind of this base building, I'm looking forward to starting to add on miles here and there. Again, a gradual increase in volume to make sure that my legs are as prepared as possible for this race. But there's still plenty of time. But as I said, April 24th will be here before I know it. I could not be more excited for this race. The course is exciting. I just love the area. Obviously, it's in my hometown, so I'm thrilled. And the medal that they just announced and the shirt that they just announced are incredible. I've never seen so much thought go into a medal design. I might actually just do a video focused on the medal for this race because I think it's so cool, but really, really excited for this course. So if you are interested in running the Delaware Marathon, would love to know some folks who are running as well. I'm planning to arrive in Delaware early so I can spend plenty of time, seeing my family, but then also putting out some content about the course, about the race, my preparation, the expo, all that great stuff, and I hope to see some folks there as well. If you do want to register, I have a discount for the Delaware Marathon as well, which I will list down below, but just very, very excited for this race and for my next marathon. So if you have any questions about how things are going with training or specific questions about my training, I hope you'll put those down in the comments below. And as always, I will catch you around and see you next time. Thanks for tuning in. Cheers.